so fundamental to what we do here is reflected in this pretty famous quotation by Carl Jung. He says that we do not become light like by imagining figures of light. Rather, we do so by making the darkness conscious. And I say that today in particular for two reasons. One, because we're going to be talking about the Enneagram Style 4, which is a pro at entering the darkness, helping us to journey into the darkness, and recognizing that being a source of light in this world isn't just about being positive, but it's about integrating our wholeness. And so today, we're in the final day of a 9-week series on wholeness and the Enneagram. I'm Reverend Nhien. Welcome to Unite Unity Temple's weekly interspiritual service. At this service, what we mean by interspirituality is that while unity is both historically and culturally grounded in the teachings of Jesus, teachings like unconditional love, forgiveness, and grace, as opposed to the teachings about Jesus, we here actively embrace practices and principles from the world's religious and spiritual traditions, understanding that all of them have something to offer to us. And so welcome, no matter what gender identification, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what religious belief system or lack thereof that you come from, you are most welcome to be here with us today as we journey into this sacred map of the Enneagram here together in our final week and integrate and talk about the integration of the type 4, remembering that even though we'll be talking about the personality type 4, the Enneagram as a map of consciousness really paints the consciousness that abides in all of us. So 4 is not just a personality, but archetypally, it represents an aspect of consciousness that resides within all of us. And so its integration point is something also within us. So, okay, my pronunciation is going to be, I speak a little Spanish, a little French, a little Vietnamese, but like Hebrew, not so much. I think the pronunciation is like Zuzia, but I'll just say Zuzaya. Like that's a little bit easier for me to pronounce. There's a Hasidic tale that I want to share about here today. And I know I've shared about this tale before, but it's so apropos today that I want to reiterate it. So there's a Hasidic tale in which this rabbi named Uzziah dies and goes before God, before the seat of judgment. And as he's waiting for God, he starts to get a little bit worried. He starts to think, wow, maybe I'm going to be judged and compared to people like Solomon. I don't know if I'm as wise as Solomon. Or maybe I'm going to be judged and be compared to someone like David. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm as courageous or as cunning and wily as David. No, or maybe I'll be compared to Moses. And I'm certainly not as faithful as a leader as Moses. And so he's sitting here waiting before the judgment seat of God and starts to fret. But then finally, when God appears, it says, doesn't ask the question that he was anticipating, which was like, why weren't you more like Moses? But instead, God asks, why weren't you more like Uzziah? So, how many of us in our lives have at any point wished, wondered, why we couldn't be just a little bit more like somebody else? You know, maybe for some of us, this was brought forth to our attention early on, very explicitly, like by our parents. I know for me, I had an older sister who was just 1 year older than me, and almost everything I did got compared to her. And I had people, like I remember going out with her in college, And having a guy have the audacity to be like, I'm talking to you. I was a little too scared to talk to your sister. She's so pretty. Like compared, I was seriously, someone actually said that to me, and I'm like, oh. So feeling that lack. And then my sister is absolutely brilliant. A straight A student in her AP classes in school. She, get 5s on all her exams, the top scores. And then there's little me 1 year after. And, the teachers were you could just see, oh, you're Vuong's sister. And I could just feel that sense of already, I'm not that, right? I'm not that. And then there was such a strong perfectionistic overachiever mentality in our family that somehow I managed to believe throughout most of the years of my life that I wasn't pretty enough unless I looked like the models in the magazine or on television. But not just that. I needed to compare my intelligence too. And so I'm reading people like Stephen Hawkins, and Albert Einstein. I'm like, wow, well, I'm not as smart as they are. And so always having that sense of falling short. And not all of us necessarily were told explicitly, like by our parents, like by my mom, like, why can't you be as neat as your sister? My sister would just pick up things like crochet or cake decorating when she was 11. Rubik's Cube. She could solve the Rubik's Cube in 2 minutes flat, And so there I was. I would get the Encyclopedia Britannica books off the shelf, the children's childcraft books, and there would be these crafts. And by the time I was done, the floor was littered with my cuttings, and I was just messy, and creative. It's like, why can't you be neat like your sister? And so again, some of us hear that message explicitly, but others of us don't. Some of us only feel it. We feel it in the, oh, well, so-and-so can play that sport so much better than I can. I'm aware of that. And I noticed how much attention he or she gets because they can do that. In my family, something else that was heralded was sacrifice and giving. And this, my sister, was awesome too. How could you compare to buying your grandparents a house, being a doctor, and then going on the weekend to go paint the house for them? And so just this idea that like just watching someone show up and go, oh wow, she's such a giving person. And look how much love she seems to get from parents. So some of us see that. We see that in school. Wow, that guy can play football. So I wish I was as agile, athletic, etc. So most of us, I would say, have had some experience, whether it's in the workplace, they're more organized than I am. I wish I was as organized. I wish I was as methodical. I wish I could follow through like that person. Many of us have had the experience of comparing ourselves to others. For the Enneagram Type 4, they do this as a living, like as a matter of identity. Now imagine, for some of us, we have this aspiration of like, I want to be more like so-and-so. But we also have within us an optimism around the fact that we can do it. So for some of us, it's a way of pulling ourselves forward into greater accomplishment. Hey, I like what he or she does. I like how he or she teaches or speaks. And so I'm going to emulate that, and I'm going to learn from it, and I'll grow from that. And there's a positivity and a confidence. Core to the Enneagram Type 4 is the opposite. There is within comparison, imagine, you compare yourself to others in the world, and somewhere deep within your being is a sense of resignation, a sense of, I don't even know exactly what it is that they have that's better. It just feels like they have something that I'm missing and lacking. And not even quite knowing or understanding exactly what that is, I live in this perpetual state of envy, which is the passion of the Type 4, a sense that all of you have something that's going to help you be happy in the world that somehow I'm missing or lacking. I can't exactly find what it is. And so because I feel this as an Enneagram Type 4, my life strategy is to decide, well, here's the kingdom of God, here's the kingdom of heaven where everyone is approved of and accepted and everybody is normal but me, everyone's there. If I can't be like them, because I can't even figure that out, then I'm going to be especially unique. I will make myself into something special so that I can be beloved, so that I can be valuable. And so goes the story of you are seen for who you are. The lost childhood message is that the 4 doesn't feel seen for who they are authentically, and so the core need that runs its life is the seeking for that authenticity. Because ironically, while the 4 can feel like I am obsessed with authenticity, the reason for its obsession is actually the abandonment of its true originality and authenticity in the name of an image that it projects into itself and outside in the world of being special, and usually being specially wounded, having an especially tragic situation or life. And even when we are at Enneagram typing groups where people find out they're 4s, there's this joke that, like, if you're a 4, you're a little skeptical of the other 4s because it's like, there's only one of us. There's a sense of like, I'm special. There's only one of us, only one like me. Because of this deep need to matter, this affiliation with being different, unique, special, starts to be the compulsive driver of the 4's life. And so as we explore for each type and the 4-ness within each of us that abandons its own sort of authenticity for an image it makes of someone who is special or unique in the world, as we explore that, let's begin by looking into the characteristics of this personality type, which some of us can identify, some of us are, some of us can identify with, and some of us may have a wing in 4. For me, as a type 1 on the Enneagram, I actually go to point 4 under stress, so I feel very, very connected to this number. So let's explore what this looks like. As we shared last week, the gift of this particular personality type is the gift of an immense artistic creativity. The 4 in any even bland workplace can see things from an angle that most of us cannot. The 4 has a way of looking into the nuance of things, appreciating the beauty of life. If countries could be given Enneagram types, France would be the 4, right? It's about lusciousness and romance and beauty, but with some tragedy mixed in, right? The tragic romantic is what this type is called. But they notice what is beautiful. The tragedy is they are inclined to notice it out there. I will buy the beautiful works of art. I will have the special, precious music that other people may not even appreciate the distinct value of. But beauty and goodness and value still remain out there, right? I can see it, but the tragedy is I can never actually be it, says the 4 inside itself. But at the same time, the 4s among us are those who can sit with us in the dark. Those of us who have friends who are at the average level of health in areas like type 7, the enthusiasts, or type 3s, the performers or achievers, might struggle sometimes. If they're at the average level of health, they're not inclined to sit with us when things go negative. But the beauty of the capacity of 4s to be with us in our pain, to support each of us in facing our darkness, our grief, the things that we do not like about ourselves. The fours are so well versed in this, they can hold space continually for us in that. In this lies their gift. But yet, at the same time, imagine if we are one, as we do teach here in Unity, if we are one, then as soon as I have made myself special, what have I done? I have actually, in my consciousness, separated myself from life, from unity, from oneness, and from belonging. And so long as I, as a four, am focused only on sort of this identity of being especially tragic, being especially different and off, then the very sense of value that comes from knowing I am one with all that is unreachable, because I'm reaching for it in my image, in my identity, in my difference, when ironically the only place that I can find it is in my oneness, in my return to my own inner origin, the source of all being. So we'll explore that in a moment. So on that chart, you'll see that the four has a line to one. One is my type on the Enneagram, and ones are objective and principled, focused on the good of the world, can be very structured and methodical. The opposite of the four, within its longing and melancholy, has these intense moods and feelings and get swept away in their feelings so much that they can lose grounding. But the thing is, as the song earlier alluded to, as I mentioned, Carl Jung said, we do not become light by imagining figures of light. We do so by making the darkness conscious. But ironically, the darkness in four is not what we typically call darkness. Fours handle depth of feeling and grief and sadness very well. But their darkness is actually what most of us think of as light. Their darkness is hidden beneath them, is this sense of like equanimity, balance, structure, groundedness, some of the strengths of the type 1. But because this stuff has been shoved down and repressed, as the 4 moves to integration by incorporating these qualities, they first find the type 1 qualities in its most negative aspect. And type 1's in its less healthy, more infantile aspect is exceedingly judgmental, is like bossy. I'm never bossy. Bossy. It has this idea of what everybody else should be doing. If the world would just do this, then we would all be fine. And so when a 4 starts to feel that little bossy intruder, the tendency may be to deny it. But the idea of integration of this shadow piece for the 4 is that as you start to incorporate the qualities of the 1 and honor that sort of principled, shoulding kind of bossiness inside of you, then it starts to transmute and transform into sort of that balance and the sense of sort of peace, that sense of wholeness that the 4 longs for but doesn't really trust or believe in. Because when that wholeness is achieved, equanimity feels like balance. And to a 4 whose identity is linked to longing and intensity of feeling and emotion and darkness and grief and all the juicy negative feelings, balance feels disingenuous, like boring, right? Like inauthentic. So the very thing that moves that type toward wholeness in the beginning feels inauthentic. Why? Because what was authentic was the identity, the image of being separate, distinct, special, especially elite, right, in its darkness. And so the move has to be a move to where things like, oh, hope? I was thinking as that song Hope was on, I was like, God, how many fours in here are like hope? Just maybe for some people, but there's this penchant toward joy is not real. The storyline of the four is that darkness is more real and that happiness is not. And therein lies the way in which all fours and fourness in us thwart our own capacity for inner peace and of the joy and happiness we're really seeking. And so, even if we're not fours, I think most of us can identify with a way in which we're attached to our own suffering. I think about this as I think about how many times I, as a ones like to complain, find something wrong, criticize, and how I was like, rah, 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 like that, and I'm like, and then a friend just asked, well, why don't you tell the person? Why don't you tell them your issue? Why don't you talk to them? Well, because then my issue might be resolved. I mean, there's a way in which there's something about how we get attached to our way of being in the world. We want to be happiness, but, if I actually tried, it might get resolved, then who would I be without this gripe, right? And so the four has that peace that resides to different degrees in each and every one of us. That part of us that knows that what we're doing causes us suffering, but there's an attachment to that suffering overtaking the step that might actually end it. And that attachment might be that, I've been like this all these years. The idea that I could have been happy all this time is horrifying. So rather than actually move toward happiness, then admit that I could have been happy all this time, I'll stay over here in my complaint, in my misery, in my sorrow. And so we have compassion for that in fours and that in all of us that struggles to release an object of suffering, a source of suffering, to which we're attached almost as a matter of identity. The twos suffer. How much I give, right? How much I give, how much I sacrifice for you. Instead of just being happy that I give in a balanced way, we each suffer. The sixes suffer their own fear and reservation. But if we lose that, who would we be? We might not be the caring person if we're not sitting there vigilantly looking out for everybody's potential demise and then safeguarding against it. This is my identity, but it's the source of my suffering. And am I willing to release that, to not be that person in my life, in your life, in the life of my community? And so the path of growth by nature implies a death. Paul said, I die daily. Every wisdom tradition talks about it. And even here we herald it, and say, yes, this is the path of transformation requires that we die to our old selves. But the idea here is that we're not actually dying to our true selves. We're dying to this false identity or image to which we have become so attached that we believe if I won't be me if I let this go. But the willingness to take that chance, for many of us, we find that we journey then into a greater knowing of a true self, a wholeness. This idea that actually we come back to the source of who we're willing to let go of our concepts about who we are which differ for each of us. And I want to share a quote by, Robert Brummett. So Robert Brummett is someone I often have give talks here at our 12:15 service. He is a unity minister as well as a Buddhist insight meditation teacher, a dear friend of mine. And he wrote a book called Living Originally, and he's a type 4. So how fascinating is that correlation? But in his book, this man whom I consider to be very evolved in his consciousness clarifies what it really means. Because again, the 4's egoic structure thinks that to be original is to try to do things differently from other people. I'm distinct because even though all of you are in black suits, I have a little red tie. Like it has this way of, oh, well, you all, normal people, like that kind of music, but I like special music. That these ways in which we try to make ourselves original, when he says originality is fundamental to all of our nature. And if we are just our true nature, each and every one of us is innately original. So he says to live originally is to live consciously from the ever-present origin of life. It is to live from the very source of what is. To live originally is to live consciously from the ever-present origin of life. It is to live from the very source of what is. I'll elaborate on that. What does that mean, to live from the very source of what is? The type 4 has lost sight of the holy idea of holy origin. What this means is that somewhere along the way, there was a sense of lostness as to if I'm a 4, connectedness to the origin of life, to creation itself, to the creator, to the very substance and fabric of the universe. Having believed that I'm separate, and truthfully, again, I can't even belong. I don't feel like I belong. I have to create the separate identity. So the journey, of course, is never to go outside and try to craft this persona or self that's uniquely this way or that, but instead to go within. Christopher Hewitt's author of the Sacred Enneagram says that the primary stance that's needed for the 4 is to rest in solitude. And so going within means going into a place of solitude where there is no one to compare myself to. So I don't have a barometer that's outside of me. To go where I am sort of alone in my own being. And some 4s are like, well, I go alone a lot, like anti-people. So, and so there's where the idea of rest becomes ultra important. Because it's resting from your own inner, machinations around what you need to be, the inner sense of turmoil, to rest from all that and to rest in the state of solitude in which the grace, the sense that substance, infinite, invisible, spirit, what some of us call God, is actually your true source. And that you have never been separate from this oneness. And the more that you are steeped in the remembrance of your value in that, well, everyone has an individual identity and expression that comes from that. Everyone is valuable and unique. And so I deeply get that when I rest in stillness and allow that to emerge naturally for me to understand that I don't have to try to be unique because I already am. But I am from the state of my belonging, not from all the ways that I try to be better than, but usually feel that I'm worse than. And so that very important distinction. And so This is a longer quote, so I didn't put it up there, but it was so important to me. As we conclude this series, this passage from A.H. Alma's Facets of Unity, a very brilliant book on the Enneagram, feels so apropos to all of our journey home. All human endeavors are ultimately attempts to regain this connection, attempts to return home, to go back to where we feel contented and without worry, where we feel things are just the way they should be. Everyone is working on the same task of returning home, whatever their projects and enterprises. But trying to return home is a very tricky and subtle thing, because we are estranged by the very way we see ourselves. It is not as though you were thrown out of paradise as a punishment for something you did wrong, nor is it a matter of doing some exercise or going through some difficulty to regain contact with the origin. To regain the origin is, in a sense, the process of annihilating oneself. Because the very way that we think and the way that we perceive ourselves is what disconnects us. As we have seen, what disconnects us is the delusion that we are a self with a separate identity. So it doesn't matter what we learn, what we attain, what we gain, how far we go. These things will not reconnect us. And so the invitation home to really comprehend your sense of innate value, to relinquish the need for our identity, our image in the world to sustain us, to fall back, to rest in the solitude that gives us the space in which who we really are, the brilliance and the beauty that is natural to each and every one of us, absolutely no one excluded. No one excluded because of your belief system, because of your sexual orientation, because you are taller or shorter, because you're smarter or less smart, because you have this physical condition or because you don't. But that everyone has that sameness. But the only way that we can feel it for ourselves is if we relinquish for ourselves the ways that we need to be special. That's the only way that we can feel that. So I sometimes share poetry by other people in honor of the type 4s who are my models for courage and creativity. I'm actually going to close with a poem that I wrote. And I want to say a few words about this poem I wrote just a few months ago, because as a type 1, 4 is where I go under stress. But consciously going to the qualities of the creativity of the 4 is part of my own integration. Letting go of the fear of judgment. Is this a good poem? Is this a bad poem? And all those things are so related to this journey of like, what if what I am here to simply express is enough? And the other piece to this is that embedded in this is my own journey of 4-ness, of comparison, of difference. And well, you'll hear at the end how I resolved it. So here's my poem. In a way, it's to all the 4s in my life. In a way, it's from the 4 in me. And in a way, it's from God to me. If you are still wanting to hide in the shelter of blackened wood and splintered winter trees, even if I see you, I will not seek for you. But if you are wanting to be found, you will find yourself in the limbs of summer's green, and you will know yourself to be made of its same sunlight. If you are still shifting suffocating lies like desert sand, though I hear your stifled cries, I will not shout of stillness on your behalf in the midst of your maelstrom. But if your lips are dry with thirst and crack open with truth, then I will keep my sacred word and whisper of our shared destiny, and I will breathe the first real breath you gasp along with you. If you are still thinking you are above or below, then I cannot stand with you. But if you entrust your mediocrity to me, I will kneel before you like a mountain. I have known your climb. And when you are nothing more than a dandelion in spring, already half shattered by the wind, I will blow on what is left of your unpatterned seeds. And what you once broke, I will make whole again. What you destroyed, I will create again. What you lost, I will find in you again. What you forgot, I will recount in us again. That single number, 1 + 1 is 1. I am you, and you are me. And so, I invite us now to take the message of oneness that comes from equality, not from separation, not from distinguishing ourselves. I invite us each to take that in a time of resting, maybe not in outer solitude, but in inner solitude, where we come to know something at the depths of our own being, that I am you, and you are me.